So I'm a columnist for Sex on Thursday. Every other Thursday I publish a column called Let's Talk About Sex, where I talk about romance, intimacy, relationships, sex, things of that nature. And I've been writing under a pseudonym since August of 2023, which is like 2.5 years ago. It's kind of crazy. Oh my gosh, I do remember learning about sex for the first time, way younger than I should have, and I don't think I knew I was learning about sex. One of my friends on the playground, we were swinging. I remember we were going back and forth, and she was like, Grace, I have to tell you about this crazy thing I learned about. And I was like, okay. And she was like, sometimes people kiss with tongue, and that's how they have babies. And I was like, no way. And so obviously we had to like keep digging a little more, and then we learned about the birds and the bees. Yeah, I mean, I think as a pretty base level, it's an agreed upon thing that sex education is something we lack in the United States. That's why we see things like young people getting pregnant. I mean, that's not the only reason, but I've heard everything from people who didn't even have what I had, like that just was never a topic in school, in a public school, which is interesting to me, to people who went to religious private schools, who their sex education was completely through a religious lens, and then people who, you know, had parents who were sex therapists who sat them down at like the age they learned how to talk and were like, this is how it works. You know, everyone learns differently. But in terms of like publicly provided sex education, I think a lot of it you kind of have to seek out for yourself. It definitely doesn't get easy. Like a lot of times when I tell people that I write this column, they're like, what? And I still, like, it is still an uncomfortable topic to breach sometimes. And the best way that I found to like I don't want to say destigmatize, but release that pressure is to just keep talking about it. Like if I'm talking about my column and I can see that someone's uncomfortable, sometimes I just like push a little more. And I'm like, no, this is why it's important to have these conversations. And sometimes depending on who I'm talking to, I will like go a step further and try to explain why it's important to me and why I think it's important to destigmatize, because at the end of the day, if you're not going to talk about it, you're just opening the door for like uncomfortable situations where you need to talk about it and you don't feel comfortable doing it. And also there's a difference between talking about sexual health and relationships and intimacy versus like talking about smut. Like I'm not just going around telling everybody like what I'm doing in the bedroom and asking them like what they're doing. Like that's not my business. But there's the difference between that and talking about things that are, I don't want to say socially acceptable, but like important and need to be talked about. Even when I give like funny little anecdotes, I try to always tie them back into some kind of lesson about how people should be more comfortable doing XYZ or sharing or asking questions. I think a lot of people, at least my friends that I know that enjoy the column, they're not always there to like get some huge lesson from me, but like objectively, some of the stories are funny, and that's like the goal. And at the end of the day, like sex and sexcapades and things like that lead to funny stories sometimes. Like we all have embarrassing moments that happens, and talking about it with an underlying tone of humor just like makes everybody feel more comfortable. Like nobody's having like the perfect sex that you see in all the movies. There's always going to be like awkwardness, and if you just talk about it, it makes everybody feel a little bit more seen, I think. No, they are not all my stories. Actually, very rarely are they my stories. I eavesdrop a lot around campus. Some of them are inspired by that. Most of them are my friends, funny stories from that, things I've heard about, and then I really garner things from like pop culture, what I see people are talking about. Before I was going into my PE class to learn about sex, well, I'd be like, girl, brace yourself. But I wish I could just tell myself that that's not the end, that it's okay to ask questions and not feel embarrassed about asking questions. And I wish I could have just made my younger self more comfortable in the idea that the education I was receiving in that moment wasn't the end, and like there was going to be more than that. Like I didn't just have to take that and be like, well, I got to figure the rest out for myself. Like no, you can ask questions, you can seek out information in a productive way, and it's going to be okay. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for talking to us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.